Hi everyone, my name is Margaux and welcome back to Media Women Worldwide. Welcome to Toronto. The Toronto Film Festival is home to creativity and innovation. A highlight of this year's festival was Seberg, starring Kristen Stewart. I was lucky enough to attend the press conference for Seberg and saw the cast and crew discuss the making of the film and the story of Jean Seberg.
I have an indelible memory of the first time I saw her on screen, which was in my French class when I was 16 years old, where our French teacher would get prints of French cinema from the Alliance Française to help us learn French and see cinema. And we watched A Bout de Souffle, Breathless, her film with Godard, and her performance in that movie kind of blew my teenage mind. It still seemed to me when I saw it then an incredibly modern performance. There's something so unguarded and freewheeling and luminous in that performance. And at the end of the movie, she turns and looks down the barrel of the camera in a way that kind of no actress had at that point. And I think in that movie, she sets a kind of new path to what truth is in cinema and what acting is in cinema. I didn't know that when I was 16, it just blew me away. But as I began to work as a theatre director over the years, that performance of hers always stayed with me. I didn't know what happened in this window of her life in 1968 to 1970 until I read Anna and Joe's script and then started to dive into this period of her life and the kind of tragedy of what happened to that luminous life when the kind of surveillance weaponry of the state was turned against her.
I had seen Breathless, and that was really the sort of singular encounter with Jean Seberg that I had before I read the script and met Benedict and talked about how to put this thing together. I think there's something in watching more of her films. Her first few performances are like some of my absolute favorite, and they were delivered in a time where, especially like in a commercial sense, things were really packaged and delivered in a much different way. People really stood and performed things in a really kind of what felt like prepared and skillful, way. I think in figuring out more about this particular slice of her life, kind of like really bowled over by the idea that this is like a new story. And became kind of like immediately protective of her because she does have something really available. She's incredibly available. And, she went through a lot, which the movie, does its best to showcase. And by the end, those performances are really beautiful, but in such a different way because she is receded and she's just sort of like a few inches behind her face. And in the beginning, she was protruding, like she was just like coming out of herself in this way that was like so undeniable. And initially I had this image-based idea of her, and I had this gestural kind of free, like sort of unwranglable cat. And we tried to do that for sure, but that was my initial, it was no deeper than that. And so it was interesting to get to know her through this experience.
It was Kate, one of the producers over here, who brought me 14 years ago some information about her life and said, do you know what happened to her? And I didn't, and started researching and found out this incredibly dark period of history, which I was interested in writing about anyway. And through Jean, it felt like there was a sort of perfect way to talk about her life through this pressure that she was under in these 2 years. And then Joe, you can talk about this yourself, but I think Joe was also really obsessed with Jean Seberg. Partly, I don't know, was it Breathless as well?
Breathless, yeah.
And then your grandmother.
My grandmother was an actress named Deborah Carr, and she'd made a movie with Jean in the, I think it's late 50s. It was with Preminger. And it was kind of his apology to Jean for how badly he treated her on St. Joan. And it's called Bonjour Tristesse. And Deborah was in that with Jean, so I got to talk to Deborah about who Jean was and what she was like and her memories of her. And I think it was interesting for me. Deborah's very much an actress of a previous generation, of an older studio system and an older way of acting. And I think Jean she described Jean as this sort of incredibly new, sort of fresh energy. And I was fascinated about her, and I never found the story, and then Anna and I got together as a couple. We're married. We have 2 children.
Congratulations.
And this was the script. In a way, this is the script that began our relationship together as well, because I'd said, you've found the story about Seberg that I've always wanted to write. Here, I have all my research, have all my books, all this.
Sometimes it's really like not what a director says to you. It's just having it's being accompanied and feeling like there's a certain energy that's so contagious. And I always felt, as from the first meeting that I had with him, that she was going to be held very preciously. And I don't know, it wasn't about doing it perfectly. It was definitely about being able to sort of do a sort of imaginative rendering of what it might be like to pull back the veneer of her life that was available to us in research, but really there was no way to know her inside of that period. You take like cumulative impression and just try and fiercely protect her. I just was, the intimidation factor and all of that plays into all of it. There wasn't a day that I didn't go to work sort of like, don't want to mess this up today.
One thing, the aperture of this movie is very specific and doesn't pretend to tell the whole story. We have glimpses of her life, and she described this period as a long nightmare that when she looked back, she couldn't tell the truth. So we're trying to find that truth in that. But it's interesting, so much of the biographical material, it's already a kind of fiction. The biographies have differing accounts of this period, but then also her husband, Roman Gary, he wrote a novel called White Dog about this period. The Mexican novelist Carlos Fuentes, who she had a relationship, also wrote a book, Diana, the Goddess Who Hunts Alone, also talking about it. So there's already this kind of fictional idea of her, but then Anna and Joe weave in all these facts in there. At one point she says to Hakim that the correlations between the racism in America and the Vietnam War being the same thing, and there's a quote of Jean saying that at a party. So I love how these truth are weaved into something that then also has a kind of speculative history. But in the end, we're trying to be truthful to that experience and invite the audience to get close to that experience of Jean. Initially having that kind of fascination and that idea of who Jean was, but then the talk and tension in the writing, and this idea in the writing which I found deeply cinematic and a kind of way into making the movie instead of being a traditional biopic, which I wasn't really interested in making of Jean. And her story is vast and there's so many stories in her life and the lives around her, but to focus on this window of this, really a story of privacy and the destruction of privacy, to kind of intertwine her life with the FBI agent Jack's, so that you see the watcher and the watched, and you have a story of 2 lives interweaving, where through Jack we experience him with the question, who is Jean Seberg? We experience his period of fascination and a growing obsession with her, but also then his awareness that he is involved in something deeply destructive and a kind of growing empathy towards her. But we know from him that she senses that someone is there watching her, and she's telling people someone's there. We know that they are, but they don't meet. They walk in parallel until that final scene of the movie. And I found that a kind of very beautiful way to tell this story about privacy. I was also really deeply fascinated with, I've been lucky enough through my life as a theatre director in the the precious space of the rehearsal room to spend time being close with actors, and seeing the kind of bravery and vulnerability that they need to do their messy, beautiful jobs, and that involves putting every aspect of themselves on the line in front of the camera or on the stage. You got to go out there and put your truth and yourself into the character that you're portraying, and use every aspect of your memory and your history. And in Jean's story, we have someone who's trying to do that, who in the role she's choosing and the way she does, she's trying in this raw, instinctive way we've been talking about to do that. But at the same time, that very precious, vulnerable space is being invaded by the same mechanics that are used to make cinema, cameras and microphones. And I was deeply fascinated by that question of what happens to an actress, what happens to a woman when that pressure is put upon them. How do they survive that? How are they transformed by that? What happens with the paranoia of that experience? And that seemed still a very timely and urgent story to tell.
To support Media Women Worldwide, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll see our next video.